I am Jonathan Albin, your host, and we are today doing our session 0 as we had planned on doing. And we're going to be looking in particular at one of the elvish species, one of the Eldrin, if you will. And we're going to talk about their background, some information about the lore behind them, and some information about the species itself. As a matter of fact, hang on just a second. I do want to, if I can get, I gotta find it. Hang on a second. Alrighty. Chaos and disorder requirement at the beginning of every show. Must show how super professional I am at doing this. Yes. So, welcome to Nycos Session 0 Chronicles, Episode 1 officially. We did our Session 0 last week and went through kind of the structure of how these episodes will go. And this one will be the first one that follows that, in theory at least. Now, I want to thank you if you are just joining us. As I said, I'm Jonathan Albin, and I've been a game master for role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons, specifically for very nearly 50 years. I started playing before the game was published. I was learning at the table of Dave Arneson, one of the guys that designed the game, and 2 weeks later, I was running the games, and I've been a game master now continuously for that entire time. So, one of the things that's happened is that my game world, my homebrew, as today's modern terminology would have it, my game world is Nycos, Nycos, like the spelling is over here. There we go. Get this pointing thing down eventually. And the NycosRPG is a role-play game mechanism that I developed, and this is a copy of the book. Probably isn't going to show up very well because screens do that nowadays. Doesn't even want to show it to you. There we go. Dark Shards, Nycos system book. And this is the first of at least 7 of the system books that will be developed over time. And this one in particular covers the fantasy setting. So I want to thank you for your participation in this episode, and I hope that I can answer any questions you might have as we go along. I do record these on Twitch, and so if you have the opportunity to catch the recording of them, which happens 9 p.m. Pacific time every night for the session zeros, and then I also do a Game Master Soapbox at 11 p.m. also every night. So you can catch those on Twitch at twitch.tv/NycosRPG, and you're more than welcome to join in the conversation by leaving me messages in the chat, and I do respond to them during the session if I can. And today's episode is no different. So welcome to the show, and if you're watching and participating, great. I do have access to the chat, so I'll be watching that as we go along. So the first species we're going to deal with are called the Inandaran, and the Inandaran people are Eldrin in nature, which is, of course, derived from the concept of the Elves. So an Eldrin is a person that has typically finer, narrower features than human beings, and usually have pointy ears and other physical characteristics that would put them in the same category in most fantasy realms as being of elvish descent. In this case, the Eldrin are descended from the Nyxians, who came over from the fairy realm a long time ago, and their existence is as similar to the, if you will, wood elves of other fantasy settings as can possibly be. They have specific marks. Every species on Nycos has specific marks, and within the books there are breakdowns by the name of the not helpful. by the name of the species and the description that includes marks. And the marks are the physical characteristics of the species, and the players, when they choose to play that species on Nycos, they get to pick from the list of however many are. Usually there's 6 or 7, and they can choose up to 6 of them. Characteristics like, in this case, Dara's Echo, the Inandaran Eldrin have the ability to capture and replay, if you will, emulate exactly sounds that they heard in the last few minutes that came via plants or animals in the area. So even the sounds that plants can make, they can emulate. They have perhaps the sense of being, which means that they have the instinctive awareness of where they are in any forest ever. So as long as they're in an area that is constituted as forest, they cannot become lost, for example. The eyes of Inan allow them to see invisible objects against a natural background, and this includes even their own structures. Their structures are naturally invisible, and they can actually make them out as they walk through the forest. The sense of their olfactory sense allows them to detect and know an individual anywhere within 30 or 40 feet of them. So they can actually determine who you are by the natural scent that you would have. There are, of course, species that can counteract this, so these are all default skill type based functions. They also have the ability to recognize nuances of flavors and tastes, and also because of that, they have natural immunity to the majority of poisons that are based on plant or animal venom. They have the ability to non-magically heal wounds. So they naturally have an affinity with life itself, and therefore they can manipulate and assist in non-magical healing by simply understanding and concentrating upon the wounds. And they also have the ability for trailblazing, and that means they can travel at full speed even through the most difficult of natural terrains. So these marks function as skills within the NycosRPG roleplay game. These marks do advance as you use them. So as you do utilize skills, you can, if you utilize, for example, your eyes of Inan to be able to see invisible objects, the attempt to utilize it to see an object, whether there's one there or not, or whether you attempt to, whether or not you succeed, you still get to advance it. And so all of these natural abilities are trainable. You can actually improve at the very things that you are part of. The difference is that those marks don't have the capability of being advanced through inspiration. In other words, you can't just spontaneously have a large increase in the skill, but you can gradually improve it over time. The locales from which the Inandaran derive are but 2 in the whole world, unique as far as where the species families originate. That is either in the forest of Inandaran, which dates back to the second iteration, or from New Crystal, and New Crystal is within the last iteration. So it's a relatively new formation, but there is, for the first time in several iterations, more than one home tree to which the Inandaran can claim their lineage and their home. Therefore, when we speak of the nations of Inandaran, they, for decades, well, for centuries, for iterations, only claimed to have the name of the forest in which they existed, which was Inandaran. And since then, in this most precise of iterations, the 9th iteration, if you will, the now of the campaign, they have defined their nation. Because of the fact they've got multiple trees now, they are calling the entire nation the nation of Aelcrys. So when I utilize the term nation of Aelcrys, it's fundamentally universal forests, 2 of them in fair proximity to one another, within 1,000 miles of one another. But the primary nation of Inandra is by far the most expansive forest of Nycos, and the second, the new crystal is a offshoot, if you will, and they are separated by between 500 and 1,000 miles, but they are still relatively close together. And the two of them recognize the authority of Inandra as the primary forest and the primary home tree, but the nation, therefore, is encompassed by both. Therefore, your character within the Nycos realm, if you are deciding to play a Inandaran Eldrin, then you're going to either come from New Crystal or come from Inandara, at least by family. Certainly, you can live in other places, and there are no limitations to where the story can start. But just for clarification, nation predominantly counts as those two city-states and their environs. So then we're going to talk a little bit about there are no, if you will, specific classes within the Nycos RPG mechanism. You can choose skills from a lot of different varieties, but one of the most specific clans or organizations within the Inandaran population, or the Aelcrys population in this case, are the Lindaleasan. And the Lindaleasan are also known in common or to the human population. They are known as the Tender Warden. And this means that they are observers of nature and protectors of nature, including somewhat husbandry and animal life coordinators, if you will, within their zones. So they monitor populations and are aware of, like, for example, when they can offer various hunting seasons to mortals and others that might want to come into the forests to hunt game. They are the ones who determine when those rules would apply. And although the Lindaleasan are not a class structure per se, you don't have to be a Lindaleasan if you are if you are serving, if you're playing the character of an Eldrin, of an Inandaran in particular. You can choose to follow this or not, but they are generally a group that is organized and established by the governance of the nation to protect their boundaries and the plant and animal life within their domain. Historically, one of the most important characters of the Inandaran species was one of the archons from the 7th iteration, who was known as Ray of the New Dawn, and her name was simply Ray for the majority of her character's existence, and it was only after they had achieved their champion status and were in the process of resolving the conflicts of the iteration that she took on the title of the New Dawn. And this is in part because she was being led by the story into the position of being one of the avatars of the iterations. And so therefore Ray of the New Dawn is a persona that your character might engage with once you reach the age in the game in terms of accountability at the equivalent of your 4th or 5th advancement with the game. And that generally it just means that it's going to be an NPC encounter at some point when you are involved in the story. Then Ray may show up to guide or assist you. The concept of Ray, or the persona of Ray, or manifestation, if you will, is of a flaxen-haired, almost a golden-haired woman, fair of skin. Her perpetual smile upon her face, and an air of peace and calmness, and while she does have a temper from time to time, if you insult or damage something that is important to her, she may respond with some form of frustration and pensiveness. But generally speaking, she's primarily a calm personality who will make her presence known to those who are of opposite tendencies. In other words, she will often show up to be a softening for someone who is rage filled or frustrated or angry a lot. And so she will almost be a frustration to the person to whom she is making her manifestation, because they are not expecting or not willing to be as calm and placid as she is. But nonetheless, that's why she does it. So then we're going to talk a little bit about the primary home tree, and that's the term Aelindir is referring to the primary home tree of the Inandarans, which means it's the tree that grows in the primary forest. And it is the place in which the Lindaleasin all make their oaths and promises to serve, and functionally acts as a holy place, although the concept of religion and godhood and such is kind of lost upon the Eldrin. They are virtually immortal in that a character who is of the Eldrin, they're one of the few species that will withstand tests of time and can actually survive from one iteration to the next. Now, in Ray's case, she did not, and that's more to do with the tragic love tale of how Ray was involved with a mortal, a human being, and therefore she chose to stay with him as much because it was in the Tolkienian legend as it is because the players actually met each other at our game session, fell in love, got married, and now are together and have children and all of that. So it's a perfect matching of the fictional story with the reality. And although at the time I thought it was a horrible situation, and there's more you could possibly know about that, but nonetheless, Ray of the New Dawn now has become elevated to the point where she represents the Aelindir wherever the Eldrin people are. So adventurers who are in the field may call upon Ray, and there may or may not be any influence from her side in reference to that, because the avatars do have agency within the realm as well, but they are shadows of what they once were and are generally those that act only through encouraging others to act. So then we're going to talk a little bit about the Battle of Elwendale, and that is far more close in time. This is something that occurred in the 8th iteration, shortly after the liberation of a city by the name of Cauldron from the curses of the past and the expulsion of a non-dimensional attack on the place. And shortly thereafter, a being of the second Genesis known as Tongue Eater, who was a pretender to the role of godhood. He was an individual being who was attempting to establish religious and national worship of himself. This Battle of Elwendale occurred on the boundary of those, and it was in the name of protecting the city of Cauldron and the environ of that area, which was at that point not known to be, but was originally part of the kingdom of Gilder, provided opportunities for the people of the Gilder frontier to be pushed, to be established and hold their line against the encroaching sect-gen population. Now, this sect-gen population would eventually be totally corrupted by the influx of dragonborn by the name of, it just dropped out of my memory right there. This dragonborn who had the endeavoring purpose of becoming the first of dragons on Nycos in more than 4,000 years. There had not been a dragon's existence planetarily for three full iterations. And so this was Callisto. Callisto was the name of this section, rather, not section, this dragonborn who was attempting to be raised or elevated to the level of being dragon, to the point where they called themselves the first of dragons. And as they were non-binary, they were not in a position to have young, and so there was never a chance of this form of dragon becoming widespread. But nonetheless, it was a threat, because had they, pardon my French, had they achieved that goal, then they would have propagated culturally by allowing other dragonborn to follow the same path. Now, the dragonborn that were exigent on Nycos were anomalies, rarities, to the point of near obscurity. And yet there were multiple players who were of the enjoined, means they were characters on Nycos that were played by players, who had come from dragonborn stock and were attempting similar objectives. Now, in this case, the being was not worthy, was eventually subjected to isolation, and eventually was overthrown in the waning days of the 8th iteration. But this Battle of Elwendale set the boundaries between Draconia, which was the nation of Callisto as the chosen, and the edge of what is now again known as Gilder, which is the boundary nearest the city of Cauldron, which has, in this modern iteration, yet to be named because we don't have any adventures going on there yet. But the point is that it played an instrumental role in creating a dividing line between the two upon a river basin that divided Draconian forces from Gilder defenders. This battle was basically fought between the defensive forces known as the Guardians of Cord, a army of Golian warriors, last of their kind, who fought to protect the boundaries of the known realms from the Draconian forces, which were Dragonborns and cold-blooded or Bathrakeen Sekjen. And we'll go more into this, and the terms will make more sense to you as we go along. But the point here is that the Battle of Elwendale drew the line and made the difference for the end of the iteration on where the boundaries of the countries would be. Now, what impacts have the Inandaran people had on past iterations? Well, the people of Inandaran, as they occupy roughly 1/3 of the boundary between Jarland and Nordland, they are the crossroads for trade. And although they protect their internal forests very strongly, they do have trade routes that pass through that they monitor and maintain for such caravan groups. So those pass through those areas without any interference from the Eldrin, but their impact was such that they were able to prevent the destruction of certain parts of the world of Nycos during the period known as the Swarming. And during the Swarming, it was the Inandarans that held the line and became a defensive wall against the surging swarm. Previous iterations, Inandara was also the central negotiating point for wars that had been fought throughout the Middle Kingdoms. And when we get to the point of geography in a couple of weeks, then we'll go back over where these places are. But their positioning is perfect for clamping down or filtering the advance of any forces rising from the north or sweeping from the east, and therefore have acted as a balancer and filtration, if you will, of the hostilities, and therefore reduce the overall impact of marshaling armies. Now, in the modern iteration, as we're looking at their initial influences on this iteration, the formation of the Lindaleisen has literally been since the founding of New Crystal, and New Crystal's positioning is optimal for putting the Eldrin people far deeper into the center of any activity going forward, because they now are representing not only a crossover point between the Yardland forces and the Nordland forces, but they now also can engage equally powerfully with the Roland forces that may be moving in from the west. So they literally protect the majority of the Nordland from the other two nations, the other two continents, but they also act as a stopgap between the other two as well. Therefore, will be acting much more of a peacemaker going into the next iteration, which means that Aelindir will be a more utilitarian place for adventurers to pass through going forward than they were in previous iterations. So I think we're going to see some dynamic changes in the role play of Nycos and of the personas that come from the Inandaran people. Alrighty, so we accomplished this all in a little less than half an hour. Phew. So I now have some time to answer any questions or accept any comments from anybody. I do see we have got a new follower. Fridays 789 did join us today. Thank you. Thank you very much for doing that. Great to have you with us. Those of you that are aware, I have ongoing conversations with participants as they let me know that they're online, because I only can respond when I see chats or comments in the comment section, or in this case, the chat block. So if you get a chance to see this video on our YouTube page, realize that the chat portion is not going to be uploaded to YouTube, because that's something that's specific to those who are members of our community on Twitch. So you definitely want to join us for our live shows, which are at 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. respectively, every day of the week, Monday through Sunday. 9 p.m. Pacific for Session Zero Chronicles, and 11 p.m. Pacific for the Game Master's Soapbox. So if you're online now and want to join the conversation, just drop a howdy in the chat box so I know you're here. And otherwise, I will probably wander when it comes to definitions and descriptions from this point for the next half an hour. So there you go. We accomplished what we wanted to, which was to get through our agenda list straight through, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to do so, because that means the information will be much more accessible to other players in the future, because each of those segments will become a separate subsegment, so that a character can get information on their particular Session Zero information without actually having to deal with the entire presentation. There you go. In the meantime, anything else that I needed to particularly say? Oh, I did want to mention that the Game Master's Soapbox episodes will be airing, as I said, at 11 p.m. on Twitch, and we do take questions and such from the show, and then we stay on for half an hour to an hour afterwards, shooting the breeze and communicating with the community. So make sure you're able to join us. If you're able to join us, please do so. Also, you'll notice that there's a bit of a community drive right now. This is a fledgling channel, although I've been on Twitch for better than a year. I've only recently started to actually actively build my community. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe and become a member of the community. This gives you access to my Discord channel and also gives you information on our Patreon program and a lot of additional things that are not available to the YouTube community. So do please subscribe if you can to NycosRPG on Twitch. And if you are on YouTube, why don't you go ahead and subscribe there, because there's no fee involved, and subscription there really does a lot to help with the algorithm. I recently heard a very interesting reference to the reality is that the algorithm is only responding to the viewers. So really, I shouldn't say algorithm ever. I should only talk about the audience, but the audience is larger than the number of players that I could possibly contact directly. So it's far more than my audience. It's every audience out there possible. So let's see. Oh, also want to mention on Saturday we will be continuing our process. So tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Pacific, we will be operating a role play game right here on Twitch. And you as viewers can be players simply by showing up and communicating to us through the chat, immediately taking on one of the persona or roles in the game. And I will endeavor to encompass as many players as show up. Now, to this point, I have only had a couple, 2 or 3 show up at any given time, but I am confident that I can handle 6, 8, 12 players at a time. My personal record is something like 107 players in a 4-hour game session. That's a whole different conversation. But at 10 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow morning, we will be running the Nycos Open Twitch experiment, which is my way of saying, let's play a role play game where you don't have to have a camera, you don't have to have a speaker, you don't even have to talk. You can simply text the information you want to in the chat box, and then I'll respond for the action turns for the players from that information. That to my awareness, that hasn't been accomplished yet. I don't know that it has ever been tried, and I'm endeavoring to be the first game master to embrace wholeheartedly the idea of a virtually infinite audience, because each person can bring their own character, their own persona into Nycos, and they obviously are part of the population already there. So it's just a matter of linking them in terms of their action week over week. So looking forward to that. So these Session 0 Chronicles are basically an outlining of subsegments of what you would normally have in a Session 0 one-to-one conversation, only I'm covering it with a much broader brush to make sure I get a little bit of information about each species, nation, creature, artifact, edifice, battle, and impact throughout the timeline of the Nycos realms. So we are coming up on, we're just over the half-hour mark, and so I have accomplished what I intended to do in that half an hour. However, I'm still open to conversations. If anybody comes online and wishes to, go ahead and put a comment in the chat, and I'll be willing to resolve any questions you might have. And one of the dynamics of NycosRPG is that as an open-ended system that has a chronological heartbeat, a timeline, if you will, of functions, players can literally jump in and jump out at any given time, because the persona that they are playing need only be involved in the moment that they make decisions. So therefore, you can share them or swap out, or multiple personalities, if you will, can manifest within the personas as they are defined. So If there's a particular type of persona you wish to play, we can work on that specific character for that. If there are particular types of careers that you want to pursue, we can build your persona in that direction. So I am going to go ahead and end a little bit early because I haven't had any response from the peanut gallery, so to speak. So thank you for your attention for the show. Thank you for taking the time to tune into my channel. And as I noted, if you want to know when we're going to be broadcasting, make sure that you click the follow button on Twitch. If you're on YouTube, click the subscribe button and the bell notification to make sure you know every time a new episode is aired. And also, if you like the video and think there's something useful here for other people, please go ahead and share this with your friends as well. If there's something in the show you didn't like, make sure you leave a comment for me, because I tend to respond to every comment that comes in, for good or ill, and I believe in the field of communication. So I believe that role play is ultimately one of the greatest ways that we can communicate person to person, and I look forward to any conversation with you at all. This is Jonathan Albin. I am the Game Master. This has been Nycos Session Zero Chronicles, Episode 1, and we will see you all next time. Have a great night, and I'll see you in the funny papers.